We have a great session in store with a whole bunch of fantastic people. This session is being moderated by Kedar Gore, who is the director of the Corbett Foundation and has been a friend of NCCI for ages now. In fact, when I first started my PhD around Kanha, Corbett was one of those places, Corbett Foundation was one of those places where I made my first friends in the landscape. So it's really nice to share this journey with you. And Kedar, I will hand it over to you after I quickly go over who's going to be here for this session. So we have Dhwani from the FES, from Foundation of Ecological Security. We have Abhinav from TNC. We have Dr. Shekhar Kolipaka, who's a biosocial researcher and has lots of work previously also involved with NCCI, where he works with communities in certain parts of central India. Marie is here from WRI. Richie is here from EDF. Sunil is going to join us. He's going to try. He's from RBS Foundation and has also been working with us for a while. Gitika is from DA, Development Alternatives. Ruchika is also from WRI, and Sudarshan is from Save the Children, but previously he's been working in Sivni and has also worked with the Reliance Foundation. And so before we get started, I'd just like to thank everyone who's watching, everyone who's here, and also tell you about all the great things we have on this platform. So it's not just this 2-hour live session. Today we might go a little longer because we have a lot of people and a lot of information to talk about, lots of issues that revolve around livelihood and restoration. Please, everyone, do go check out the short film showcase. It's a new effort for this virtual sessions that we have, and they're really beautiful films. And it really allows you to feel like you're back in Central India, even for the few minutes that you're watching them. So check those out. Other things you can do on this platform, there's the event feed tab, where you can use it as a social media space, post, discuss, whatever you want to do. You can also set up one-on-one meetings with each other. And also there's the networking lounge where you can go as a group to discuss things, perhaps work out what your next steps are as a group, or even make new working groups in the NCCI. So welcome everyone, and I would hand over to Kedar.
Thank you very much, Amrita. Thank you very much. And I'm so glad and so privileged to be a part of this NCCI organized CILS 4. And today is the theme of today's session is wonderful. Restoration and livelihoods, two of the topics that are very close to my heart. The Corbett Foundation, the organization with which I've been working for the last 11 years, and we have been working in the Central landscape as well. We have been focusing a lot of our activities on this issue, and I'm really glad that we have some wonderful lineup of speakers and panelists today who will be sharing their rich experience of working in this landscape. They have worked at practically all levels, right from policy making to grassroots conservation, and listening their views and their perception about what they think, how these two important aspects of conservation go hand in hand, and how that helps in the larger conservation scenario that we all are concerned about and working for. So without wasting much time, may I now request our first speaker for today. She's Dhwani Lalai. She's a project manager with Foundation of Ecological Security, and may I request her to start her presentation, please. Over to you, Dhwani. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'll just share my screen and begin. Is it visible?
Yes, your screen is visible. Go on, Dhwani.
Okay, yes, thank you. So hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm going to be presenting FES's work in Madhya Pradesh in Mandla district, basically restoration through active management of invasive species and commons. Let me just begin by giving a context around the invasive species that FES Mandla has been concentrating on since the past few years. Lantana camera, most of you may have heard and seen of this invasive species. Basically, there was a study which was recently published by a few of the scientists from WII, and which basically gave a structure of how lantana has spread in India by using several tools, and basically they kind of the abundance of lantana was recorded in the study, and they found that around 200,000 square kilometers of Indian forest was surveyed during this study, and found lantana, presence of lantana in about 75% of the sites which were surveyed. And the study also then went on to estimate that how much lantana, how much more land would be covered by lantana, and that was about 44% that they estimated. And as you can see in this map, a lot of the invasion of lantana is concentrated in the Western Ghats and in the Shivalik ranges, as well as in central India, where most of us work. This was one study. The other was in 2019. The Indian State of Forest report also gave a certain mention of lantana in MP. That report estimated that about 4.66% of the total area of the recorded forest area was covered by lantana. So basically, the point of this is to, I mean, there are studies which are now showing this, which are concentrating on lantana and invasion in our forests. It is making the problem visible, but there are very few studies or very few papers that actually go to the cause of the spread of lantana in the first place. So let me proceed by now going down to our field area where we work and our experiences in working with this invasive species. This, as you can see here, is the landscape or the topography of the place that we work in Mandla. This is the kind of way the land is structured. I'll just explain it quickly. It's in the uplands here. Is my cursor visible? I hope it is. So on the left side, on the top, are basically the commons, the forest commons, which are on the ridge area. And then as we go down, just adjacent to this forest commons in the uplands are the private lands, the private uplands, which are locally known as the Barra lands. So Barra lands is a word which will come up quite a bit in my presentation. The reason for this is that lantana, we found that lantana was mainly concentrated in these forest commons as well as the Barra lands, which are just adjacent to the forest commons. So most of these uplands or ridge areas is where maximum of the infestation of lantana is. And then as we go down, then there is there are the lowlands where mostly paddy is cultivated. And then again on the ridge area is where the homes are constructed, or where there's the homestead land and the habitation of the villages. So this is basically just to give an idea of how the landscape is. And in this landscape, this is the place, the commons and the uplands, the private uplands or the Barra lands, where mostly which are under millet cultivation, is where we found the maximum invasion of lantana. So when we started working around lantana, and over the years, the understanding that we've got around the spread of this invasive species, we try to go into the reason for the spread of these invasive species in these particular types of lands. And one of the main reasons that we've found has been the colonial management or the scientific management of forests, which have continued since colonial times. And which have also continued now with the centralized planning approach, and basically where local communities are kind of kept away from the planning process, from the governance process, which has led to the spread of these invasive species. The other thing that has led to the spread of this invasive species, in particularly those private lands where cultivation is practiced, has been a change in the agricultural production system, with the focus slowly shifting from millet cultivation to paddy cultivation, and leading to the neglect of those lands where now we find a lot of lantana invasion. So it has given that niche for the lantana to spread. In the same way, communities also perceive lantana in their own way. And so even a lot of discussions with communities have revealed that once that their interest also in these barra lands has reduced, and has then provided the space for lantana to grow. Lantana on these barra lands has also reduced their access to NTFP. So let me just pause for a moment and give you a brief idea about these barra lands. It is not just a place where cultivation happens. It is also a place which is very important for tribal households to collect NTFP, mainly tendu leaves. So tendu leaves, mahua, are a lot of these NTFPs which are present and accessed from these uplands. So with the presence of lantana, even access to those kind of NTFPs has reduced. Reduction in access to fodder from those lands. As you can see in this photograph, this is a field, and right next to it in the forest is lantana. The light green patch is lantana. Now this serves as a very important roosting place for wild boar, which then results in a lot of crop raid on these agricultural fields. It reduces the people's visibility, and but at the same time, in the absence of access to fuel wood or fencing, I mean wood, people have now started using lantana. Although it is of low quality, people have started using it for fencing around their homes, around their fields, and also using it as low quality fuel wood. So when FES began its work around removal of lantana, this is just to give you an idea about the kinds of land. So our main focus was to work on lands which are around the periphery of Kanha, in and around Kanha periphery and the Kanha page corridor, basically. That is where most of our intervention is located. In the forest commons, in revenue commons, as well as on the uplands, the private uplands, which are just adjacent to the forest. Yeah. So once lantana was removed, removing lantana is not, is not the end. We've worked with communities to actually form rules and governance mechanisms to prevent the regrowth of lantana, because it is a kind of invasive species that if it is not actively managed, it'll come back. So we've worked with communities to develop rules, to develop bylaws for management of these common lands, as well as regular monitoring of these common lands to ensure that lantana regrowth does not happen. And also, we've tried to involve multiple stakeholders to better manage these sites, because in our experience, what we found is if it is only community led, then it very often ends up in failure. So it has to be a combination of multiple stakeholders. So it has to be that the forest department as well is involved in the management along with the community. So we've tried to bring both these actors on the same platform in order to better manage the forest commons. This is just an example of the bylaw register from one of the village, where they've actually made rules around management of their commons, and saying that they'll fine people, they'll fine any offender who refuses to follow the rules of not cutting the wood or grazing their animal on that patch of land. And this is on the left side, at the bottom is a register where people have mentioned or actually recorded how much fodder they are getting from that land after removal of lantana.
Dhwani, you have about a minute left.
Oh, okay. So I need to hurry up. So yeah, people have also started, community contribution to manage the regrowth of lantana. And it serves, as I've mentioned, it does give a lot of livelihood benefits also, as well as ecological benefits. The photo on the right is something that I would like to show you. It looks like a forest, but it is actually a private land. So it is one of those private uplands that I was talking about. And it has been managed by the farmer in a way that it looks like a forest, and it is accessed by the entire community for fuel wood, for grazing, and for NTFP. Maybe I will skip this in the interest of time. It is just basically a before-after photograph of one of the sites where lantana was removed and is now being managed by the community with the forest department. I think I have covered this. This is basically perceptions of the community after lantana was removed, increased in fodder availability, access to NTFP. They've also said reduction in cattle depredation, a reduction in crop rates, and of course, cultivation. So based on this, we have started a few field investigations that the team is undertaking here. We are testing these perceptions and that have come out from the community. And I would just like to show you, thanks Pooja for this amazing graph. So we conducted surveys of these private lands where lantana was removed. And most of the respondents said that it is now much less than before, more than 50% of our respondents. We conducted a survey of around 190 farmers. And out of them, most of them said that they're using it for fodder, for agricultural crop, and for NTFP collection. And a lot of it, a significant proportion of it, is also now being used for timber, for fuel wood, as a private forest. These are just some of the reports where we regularly monitor the sites. So we've seen a change in managed forests where standing biomass carbon stock has increased because of the protection, because of the management, as well as the fodder productivity has also increased. Yes, thank you. I hope I haven't overshot.
No, that's fine, Dhwani. Thank you. Kedar, did we want to get Abhinav next?
Yes, I will request now Abhinav to start his presentation. But Dhwani, you did a very excellent presentation. I have some couple of questions which I'll come back to you later.
Sure, thank you.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Abhinav and I work with the Nature Conservancy. So the Nature Conservancy is fairly new to India. It's been around 3 years that we've started our work. So we're still sort of planting our feet with some of our work, especially on pilots and our field projects. So I'm going to present the 2 pilots that we've initiated in the Central Indian landscape. The first one is on riparian restoration on River Narmada, and the second one is on how we are sort of linking or creating a business-driven restoration approach in Chhattisgarh. So just some context on our pilot in Narmada. So we've as we all know, Narmada is so-called central India lifeline, and it's been grappling with a lot of challenges, especially degradation of its catchment areas, riparian areas, dams, so on and so forth. The government initiated the Narmada Seva mission with a view to sort of organize conservation efforts and augment them. As part of that mission, they've identified some riparian areas or sites which are on government land in Hoshangabad district, and sort of handed over these government lands to local governing bodies or panchayats. What we are doing here is sort of identifying a riparian restoration or creating a riparian restoration model. As part of our efforts till date, we've uh, studied the riparian areas, as we felt that there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of riparian restoration science. We've identified a list of 200 species of flora that can be used for riparian restoration. That includes woody species, climbers, sedges, so on and so forth. And that book was actually released, as you can see in this photo, by Shivraj Singh Chauhan, the Chief Minister of MP. Um, Till now, what we've been able to do is we've selected two of the 56 sites that were identified in Hoshangabad, and we've developed these as demonstration sites till now. We are also parallelly working with entering into an MOU with the Jan Abhiyan Parishad, which most of you will know is like the capacity building or community mobilizing vehicle that the government of MP has created. As next steps, we want to sort of leverage the foundation that we've created so far, and restore or reach out to all the 56 sites. While these sites have been, being planted by the local governing bodies, we feel that there is they lack scientific underpinning, and TNC, being a science-backed organization, wants to sort of develop a scientific restoration site for all these 56 lands that have been identified. And the way that we want to do is provide the gap input support to these governing bodies, uh, and also align with NAREGA, because there were some initiatives that were taken. I'll discuss this in my next slide, that were quite innovative, but then could not see, the government could not see the implementation properly. So what we're trying to do is reinstate some of these innovative solutions that the government itself sort of developed. So what we want to do is reinstate that mechanism, which is the Paud Rakshak. So when the Narmada Seva mission took place, it was a massive plantation drive, and under that they've developed these Paud Rakshak, or sort of sapling guardians, and they were being paid through NAREGA. They were assigned on each site through NAREGA. However, with the past political sort of or the government changes in MP, and then this volatility led to sort of somewhere this mechanism, which was quite innovative, has been fizzled out. So what we want to do as part of this pilot is to reinstate this. Through our learnings, we want to develop a restoration guide primarily for the panchayat frontline. That includes the panchayat sachiv, sarpanch, and the podrakshaks. And at the end, we want to develop a composite riparian area assessment and restoration tool, which will sort of augment the restoration work on riparian areas. So that's something that we are trying to do as part of our work in Narmada and in Hoshangabad. The second project that I'm contributing to is the Central Highlands Restoration Project. This project is being implemented in the northern Chhattisgarh district of Kabirdham, and it's jointly executed by Common Land, which is a Netherlands-based think tank, and also being by the Nature Conservancy. This project is supported by IKEA Foundation. So what we're trying to do here is we've been in discussion with the Forest Department of Chhattisgarh, and with the signing of an MOU is in progress. We are trying to develop two models. One, which is the hill model, which primarily focuses on the uplands and tribal sort of landscapes, forested landscapes, and includes work on the community forest and individual forest rights that have been given to these tribal in these tribal landscapes. Um, so, uh, so one, we want to develop that, have or develop a tree-based economy where we are looking at concepts of food forests, and also we are trying to develop a restoration approach which is driven by business and markets. So in both these models, we are working on both supply side and demand side. Uh, the in the specifically in the hill areas, we are implementing scientific management plans on both the community forest lands and in individual forest rights land. The idea is that we restore the community forest right land as natural forests, develop food forests on individual forest right lands, and on commons we develop alternative energy sort of biomass plantations. So that's the focus that we are adopting in this particular hill areas. Some of these things have already been implemented in the central Indian landscapes by multiple agencies. The uh, the 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 change that, or the difference that this particular project is, or the USP is that we are working on the demand side. There is a lot of focus on the demand side as well. We are working simultaneously with the local entrepreneurs, producer groups. We've sort of initiated our linkages, technical linkages. We've developed a linkage with the National Institute of Design, with a professor who's working on designing bamboo hangers. We've sort of created some test market linkages with companies like Organic World, which is an organic food chain based in Bangalore. Then Terviva, who primarily are working on Pongamia as an alternative fuel and oil replacement. Then there are some certain certifications that, for example, Fairwild, that are, I think, known to most of us. So this is what we are trying to do, is sort of create a package of both when we are working on both supply and demand sides. So yeah, that's I think I was within my time, and I'll hand it over to my colleague Shekhar, who is involved in this the Central Indian Restoration Project. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Abhinav. That's a great insight. May I request now Shekhar to take over?
A very good afternoon. Thanks, Abhinav, for that introduction, and thanks for the entire CILS team for this lovely opportunity to present some of our work. If I may, I would just go ahead and start the presentation. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Just like Abhinav mentioned, the Central Indian Landscape, Central Highlands Landscape Restoration Project. We started this project in 2019 in Chhattisgarh. The focus of my presentation would be on how we are trying to build partnerships and collaborations, because one of the core interests of our project is just not about developing a prototype and showing that restoration is possible, but also on how do we actually scale up to impact a large landscape and make a tangible difference to the people and to the ecosystems of this region. So we have a certain approach, and what we want to do is we want to have an impact, kind of a large impact, and improve overall well-being of people living in these restored landscapes. Likewise, we also want to revive thriving ecosystems. So this is a very holistic project. What we've understood is when landscapes degrade, the communities and ecosystems both suffer. For example, people living in these landscapes lose out financially. They lose out on jobs, they lose out on resources, they lose out on entrepreneurial opportunities. They lose out on the natural capital. For example, water systems become polluted or dry, soil erodes, and similarly, they lose out on the social capital, which is families get disconnected, People had to migrate to other places, and so many other complications. At the end of it, people lose inspiration, they lose hope. So if you restore these landscapes, the idea is all these 4 different returns, which are very important for human well-being, will return back, including thriving ecosystems. So here, what we're trying to say is human well-being and ecosystem integrity is intricately connected and is important for restoration. Now, how do we go around building these capitals? How do we restore all these 4 holistically? So we started in 2009, we started a pre-project phase and looked at 3 different states, and then chose to start in Chhattisgarh. And then through 2020, in spite of COVID, we made significant progress and started our project. And we are right now in the implementation and stabilization phase. Now, this project is a long-term project for 20 years, because in order to build up the landscape so that it starts performing its ecosystem services and starts giving people significant changes in their lives, it needs time. It doesn't happen overnight. These are slow processes. There's a lot of new habits that have to develop, new ways of living have to be incorporated. The landscape where soil is eroded or the waters have depleted, we just have to build these back. So, and to build these back, you need so many aspects, and you're actually working with so many different elements. For example, if you were to look at the natural capital, you have to build, land planning is very much important in these activities. You have soil and you have water, you have nurseries and planting, you have biodiversity. Similarly, all these areas need a lot of inputs. So we started with a team having this kind of expertise. So we started with Nature Conservancy, common land, and then we started having other partners. Some of us have expertise in all these, but not each and every aspect of well-being and ecosystem development. We need more people who can support these activities. Because so typically this is a very multi-partner, multi-stakeholder needed restoration approach. So the 20 years approach is divided into 5-year chunks. In the first 5 years, we have very clear targets. By 23, we want to kind of restore about 2,000 plus acres of hectares of land and show how this prototype is going to work, and then also use this opportunity to fine tune as we kind of scale up and impact a larger landscape. So, and that would involve both the ecosystems and also communities. Now, how do you, first of all, conceive bringing so many different partners together, and how do you start working with them? Because like I showed you, I mean, there's so many elements to this, and no one organization or individual will have all the capacities to work on these subjects. I mean, one is finance, one is to do with inspiration and how to bring back hope, more a psychological thing. And then you have the natural side of things, and then you have the social side of things. So these are all different, multi-sector, multidisciplinary areas. So you need to work with partners. So we have partners like, for example, Samarth Trust, which is a very, which is a local partner in Chhattisgarh, and they have a very good contact with local communities. So we start working with them. We have United Designs, who are land planners from America and Netherlands. We have IKEA Foundation, which put in some seed money. Common land. We have business partners like GBI, who are looking at technological innovations and ways to bring in entrepreneurship into the project. So we chose from our side, from our little group that we started. So this is the seed group, and then we started with some of our core competencies. So with whatever we have, because we are also a very business-driven landscape restoration approach that we are trying out here. And then whoever we need, and then the green dots are all the villages, the 10 villages who would like to partner with us in Kabirdham, and then people from these villages who are working here. So over the last 6 months, what we did was we put in a lot of effort to actually create a common vision of the project between our own selves, between the project partners. As NGOs, people have their own values, they have their own desires, they have their own interests, but how do you get all of them to function as a team and kind of contribute to one common large goal. So that was the effort that went in. For example, we try to unify. For example, there are some partners which are very big, and there are some partners which are smaller, local level NGOs. But how do you actually bring all these to the table and ensure that everybody's values and interests are respected in this project? Otherwise, collaboration becomes impossible. So what we did was, no matter how big you are, no matter how small you are, we have something called as our own shape values. So we try to understand what are those values of each of these partners that they want reflected in this project. And then, I mean, for example, this exercise we started in April, and by the end of December, we did a study to understand how much do they think some of these values are actually being reflected in day-to-day work. So there's a constant feedback mechanism, because some of these values are also habits. When you start collaborating, I mean, what collaboration means to different people is very, very different. So it's not just about the thinking, it's also about the doing. So initially, you just see, people doing things in a small way, but with continuous care and very conscious way of encouraging people, you'll start seeing more and more collaboration within our teams. So this we started noticing in our teams, and then again we try to understand how do we go around. What is the next steps? What do we want in the upcoming months? Which values do we feel need more focus? So it's becoming a much more democratic process. Everybody's included in it. So this is how we're building our own teams to ensure that all these diverse partners and their values are represented in the project. Similarly, and then what happens is, and these are continuously monitored. And in time, you start seeing changes. This is a technology called Theory U, a change management methodology. And then you look at how transformation happens or not. Similarly, the same extends to stakeholders. In the next step, we are building a landscape vision. What is that we want in 20 years? I mean, so we ask villagers, what is that how do you see your future? Sometimes you see that they can't really foresee so much. They can only foresee for the next 1 year, 2 years. They don't have a very long-term vision, but some partners have very long-term visions. We want to, kind of 1 million hectares. We want to look at a larger landscape. So where do we build this balance between all these different landscape visions people have? For example, we started working with people, with stakeholders like the forest departments. And luckily, the COVID gave us some opportunities to build convergence. And then, so we developed some convergence with the forest department. They wanted to put some money to ensure that the migrants who are coming into these villages from the cities were taken care of. And then we made sure that that money was spent in the restoration activities. So that way, we started collaborating and having a common vision on the landscape. So slowly we are reaching out to stakeholders in the local areas, and then we are trying to build bridges with them. Another approach is, if you look at a landscape, like I said, we have a very holistic view of the landscape. We are looking at social capital, natural capital, financial capital, inspiration. So there's a game for many people in this project. Just imagine one of the approaches to divide the land into 3 zones: a nature zone, a combined zone, and an economic zone. And then just imagine a situation. Yesterday we had lovely conversations about corridors and topics. We are completely working in outside protected areas. And then in these areas, we're trying to create these natural zones. Just imagine if only you could connect all these natural zones and allow biodiversity to pass from one area to another, what it would contribute to an organization or a group working on corridor connectivities between these landscapes, between, for example, Kana and Achanak Mar. So these would be stepping stones through which a lot of biodiversity can actually pass through. So we are creating opportunities for many people to play, because we can't do everything ourselves. As a team, we have our core competencies and core interests. And then if people are working in this landscape, for example, if there's an economic zone, if there are people who are interested in organizations or individuals interested in economic activities, they can always contact us and see what kind of collaboration we can build with them. So there's a lot of room for people and organizations to play in this project. So this is where we started, and then the next steps is to scale up from these villages into the adjoining areas. of both Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh, and also into Chhattisgarh itself. And if there are other partners, other organizations who can contribute, for example, in social capacity building or livelihoods or nature-based solutions. I mean, there's a lot of room for people to play, and we are open to these collaborations and looking forward to hearing from you if there's any interest in this. You can always write to any of our people here from Harmar Armark. I have some emails here. You can put a email and then we'll get in touch with you. Thanking you very much.
Thank you, Shekhar. Thanks for a lovely presentation. I'm sure many of the participants and audience would want to ask questions following this session. Now, may I request our next speaker, Murray, from WRI, to start the presentation.
Thanks, Kedar. I'm just sharing my screen. I hope you can see it.
Yes, your screen is visible.
Good evening, everyone. I'm happy today to speak about the true economic and ecological opportunity of restoring landscapes and present findings from our opportunity assessment in Sindhi district of Madhya Pradesh. As the speakers before me also spoke about, nature-based solutions like landscape restoration are climate-friendly and cost-effective strategies for addressing many of the huge economic challenges we face today, even the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. It can lead to multiple climate and development benefits, be it biodiversity conservation, provisioning of food, fuel, wood, and other services like generating income and green jobs. Our analysis at the national level shows that there is immense opportunity for forest protection and landscape restoration. For instance, in this map, if you can see the green areas, these are the areas of good forest which can be protected from further fragmentation or degradation. The blue areas are areas where there is opportunity for establishing contiguous forests. And the yellow areas, which is the largest opportunity, is for mosaic restoration interventions like agroforestry. For these analyses, we excluded areas where ecologically tree-based interventions are not possible, like deserts and grasslands. We also removed irrigated croplands and dense areas where a subnational analysis would yield better results. Realizing the opportunity from the previous restoration map can sequester about 3 to 4.3 gigatons of additional above ground carbon in about 20 years. So how do we convert these national level opportunity into implementable restoration strategies on the ground? We tried to do a pilot in Sindhi district of Madhya Pradesh. A brief background on this is a climate vulnerable but resource rich area. Most of the people are dependent on land for their sustenance, but they are facing a lot of developmental challenges like low income, low access to electricity and energy, and so on. The land is declining in productivity, there is soil erosion, and many other challenges. We used a framework called the Restoration Opportunities Assessment Methodology in Sindhi. The ROAM was developed by IUCN and WRI in 2014 and has been applied in about 40 countries. It helps restoration planners to develop strategies by addressing 6 key questions. First is, where can restoration happen? Why do you need to restore? That is the benefits that come from restoration. Who will restore? Who will be the beneficiaries? What will be the cost of restoring? What are the enabling conditions that need to be in place? And finally, how do you channel or build channels for implementing restoration? While implementing ROAM for Sindhi, we adapted it to the Indian context by looking at 4 key criteria. We looked at social inclusion and governance on all the components. We included a component specifically on livelihood benefits in the short, medium, and long term. We looked at social landscape, identifying networks and stakeholders who can steer restoration. And instead of a focus on just carbon, we looked at multiple ecosystem services. On the right, you can see the 6 components of ROAM, which address each of the 6 questions that was there in the previous slide. And you can see that in each component, there are mechanisms of research as well as consultation. And consultation forms the backbone of the ROAM process. Some of the participatory tools that we used in the assessment are given here. In the top left hand, you can see the restoration card game, where people identify the presence or absence of enabling conditions like presence of policies, presence of good planting material, good ecological conditions, and so on, to see whether restoration can be successful in their landscape and what enabling conditions need to be strengthened. The ecosystem diagnostic allows people to identify the ecosystem services that they need from the landscape and what would they prioritize over one another. In the bottom left, you can see a participatory mapping exercise that we did, where we had about 10 farmers and youth from Siri look at high resolution satellite imagery to identify areas where restoration can happen. And finally, here is the net map that we used for identifying the social landscape. This is just a snapshot of the various consultations that took place. We consulted about 600 people in a span of 2 years for this assessment. Moving on to the findings, we saw that there's a wealth of opportunity for restoration in CV, about 360,000 hectares of opportunity for implementing about 8 different types of tree-based restoration interventions. There were many other interventions that were also possible, but people prioritized these 8 because they address land use challenges that they were facing, including the change of natural forests to monoculture plantation, the soil erosion, over-extraction of NTFP, low productivity, and so on. The livelihood benefits analysis, which was done by our partner ILRT, identified 6 value chains that could be established for popular restoration species like bamboo, mahua, palash, and so on. This, in the medium to long term, that is 5 to 7 years, could create 30,000 jobs through 3,000 micro enterprises. In the short term, that is 3 years, growing trees could lead to 3.75 million days of employment, as well as extra income in wages and sale of saplings. On the carbon side, we could see that at least 7 million tons of carbon could be sequestered in 10 to 20 years. Importantly, restoration of these interventions could meet the priorities of local population, including erosion control, water recharge, the provisioning of fuel wood, food security, and so on. We could see that there were a lot of enabling policies in place. This analysis was conducted by our partner CEL WWF India. However, there were clarifications that were needed and awareness on policies was less. This is the social landscape in CV. As you can see, it is not diverse. However, there are key points like the divisional forest officer, the collector, the Zilla Panchayat, who present actors who should be leveraged to implement restoration. The social landscape is also bereft of civil society organizations, but they are peripheral actors who are needed to implement and steer restoration on the ground. Finally, the cost of implementing restoration in CV is about 440 to 750 crores. Despite it sounding quite large, we could see that there are already sources and channels that are supporting about 7 out of the 8 interventions that were identified. And a little more identification of innovative mechanisms, be it through tax incentives or guarantees or bonds and so on, can actually help implementation in CV. For the way forward, like I said, there were challenges that need to be addressed. Enabling conditions such as market linkages, value chains, technical capacity building is needed. Barriers, especially policy barriers, need to be addressed. And our recommendation is that policy accelerators and technical accelerators and market accelerators that bring together both people from the landscape as well as decision makers and other stakeholders would be a good way forward. We are working with the government of Madhya Pradesh, specifically the Rural Development Department, to identify ways in which there can be convergence of Manrega funds to help develop collaborative plans for a cluster of villages to implement these activities. So what does all this lead to? These kinds of activities can help India achieve many of its commitments and domestic targets, be it the Bond Challenge or the Sustainable Development Goals. And with the decade of ecosystem restoration just starting, these activities become incredibly important. I will stop here. I'd just like to add that the reports, as the findings from the CV as well as the atlas, I will share the links to those in the feed. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie, for a very, very interesting presentation. WRI has developed some fabulous maps, and we always use these maps. So thank you very much for this presentation. Now we have our last speaker for today's session, Richi Ahuja from EDF. So Richi, over to you. Hi there.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Okay.
Sorry, I'm a bit of a challenge always for me to try and get my share screen going. Voila. Can everybody see the screen?
We can see the screen. Carry on.
Terrific. So good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. It is very early in the morning where I'm at. And that was a terrific set of presentations, kept me awake all the way through. Thank you also to the organizers for this opportunity to share a snippet of our experience. Much like Shekhar, I've been also asked to speak about the power of partnerships, and I couldn't be happier. And I hope you'll understand why by the end of this presentation. A little bit about myself. I'm Richie Ahuja. I serve as a Senior Director at Environmental Defense Fund, a leading global not-for-profit based out of New York, a very science and economics-based organization. Environmental Defense Fund has a very sharp focus in these 4 areas. One is we're focused on stabilizing the climate. After all, it is the challenge of our times. We focus on safeguarding human health from exposure to toxic chemicals and pollution, preserving and restoring biodiversity, and protecting the world's oceans from pollution and overfishing. So given our focus on climate, we've been working in India with partners for about 10 years. The big question for us was, how does India develop while addressing climate change? India is the country on a growth path at 8% growth rate. If you have to imagine the country of 2040, then 80% of that country is yet to be built. And herein, we think, lies a pretty tremendous opportunity. India has to find a way to promote low carbon growth. While we engage in India on many fronts, the focus of this talk is around rural India, which is 179 million rural households, what I like to call the aspiring India. And these households over the years are going to be making choices on how they cook. Nearly 80% of the country cooks on biomass, how they till their land and grow food, and what types of electrons they consume. Now, EDF has been working with partners to understand these choices and identify the low carbon options. How do you get farmers to become more efficient and climate smart, for example? Or can we offer small households earning $2 to $3 a day, which is 200 rupees a day, an affordable clean cooking option? How do we get energy to the people? So while we work on a whole basket of these, over the next slides, I will focus on one aspect just to sort of draw things out about partnerships, and that's the clean cooking, where we're working with a coalition of partners to make a difference by deploying some large-scale biogas systems. We really wanted to show that biogas systems can not only save households money, but they have a whole bunch of ecosystem benefits as well when they're implemented. But households also then, as I said, don't have to spend monthly for LPG or spend time collecting firewood, the stories that we all know well. But that large-scale deployment of biogas was possible and would benefit the country, given that it currently imports and subsidizes gas, which again costs valuable currency. So we're all in the business of scale. You start doing things because you want transformation, and we can't do this alone, as all our conversations by the previous speakers show that it takes a village. So of course, policy change and harnessing markets are the very big levers to achieve scale, and that's where you want to go. But policy and markets do not respond unless we can clearly and rigorously show the benefits of any intervention at a reasonable, a different type of scale across the canvas of India. And that I say across the canvas of India because it is not uncommon for all of us to hear that what works in state A will not work in state B. So what we needed was a coalition of partners to build some pretty significant size sandboxes of excellence where these biogas units could be deployed and tested at scale. And a typical biogas unit, just for context, costs about 20,000 rupees at a household level. So implementing, say, 100,000 units of these, you can imagine would require pretty big investments. Say, I think the calculation is about 150 crore right there, right? 200 crores. And this can only happen if investors, whether they're private or philanthropic, have confidence in the institutional capacity that exists to deliver on these promised outcomes. So partnerships. So we ended up being a part of this amazing early partners in this amazing and a creative coalition. It's a very diverse coalition, consists of big and small NGOs, bankers, scientists, academics. The idea being to create a platform that can corral wonderful ideas and experiences, lived experiences, both sharing of failures and successes and successful approaches, but also corral large funds to improve the lives of the constituents of the NGOs. And with the long-term aim of, as I said, driving national reform. And so this network is called the Fair Climate Network. It's a diverse and inclusive network, as I said, and the network is designed to help facilitate, capacitate grassroots NGOs. I mean, like some of them are big and super capable. Others are much smaller and not as capable. And, but they have different kinds of capacities. So the idea was to develop pro-poor mitigation and adaptation projects and tap carbon resources to finance these. The aim, of course, is to help member NGOs and CBOs implement these common programs. And to do so with rigor, I mentioned rigor earlier, so at scale and be transparent. The FCN helps with capacity building. We share tools and customized software to help with the projects. What you see on the screen are examples of villages on a map where biogas units are being deployed, but you also see data on the villages, how many units per village, how often the units are being used, what's the functionality, how many tons are being reduced, etc. The transparency goes to the household level. You can even see the households real time showing functionality and other useful information, both for the NGO and for whoever's investing in these programs. Because we use interesting software platforms that are common across the board, our participating NGOs also can get a handle on demographic data. Here's an example on a screen of a family and details about their households. It helps us also identify other interventions beyond just biogas as we get into this data-rich environment. Allows us to generate some pretty sophisticated reports to help improve services. So overall, it's a sophisticated platform. It's not just about tracking the units, but also help NGOs do better bookkeeping. As you can see, the various modules on top of your screen, there's tracking NREGA funds, focusing on children education, things that people are in the business of at the NGO level. It's not just a single intervention, you're doing so many things. So it's a very data-rich environment, which opens the door for research, new insights, broader participation. I imagine many of you have done some of the research on our sites. So to help NGOs and the community ramp up capacity, the network, basically, we realized the need for dedicated capacity. And we created an entity called the Fair Climate Services. Think of it as a consulting firm almost. It's to help render services, training, consultancies, and bring domain expertise and capacity to the various networks that are participating in this space. And this cohesion of networks of mutual support is what allowed, for example, Indigo to sign an agreement with EDF and FCN in 2014 to implement biogas programs across the network. If you've flown Indigo, over the years, and you may have used the opportunity to pay a nominal amount, I think it was 200 rupees, 100 rupees, to offset the pollution related to your flight. And these large, so you can imagine corralling the funds, right? So these large investments allowed us to then demonstrate these programs at scale. And I only use Indigo as one example. There are many companies that are participating with FCN. So how big a scale? The program is pretty much cross-country. And implementation is happening in about 8 states. This is where FCN works at the moment. To give you a snapshot of the various projects, so I only talked about biogas, but as you can see, there's programs on photovoltaics, on wood stoves, afforestation. So there's about 366,000 families right now benefiting in terms of cooking systems being deployed and growing. And all this work is being done under international standards. So over 1 million tons of emissions per year, that's per year, 1 million tons are being reduced. Interesting, right? So 1 million tons selling at the market rates, even you're thinking about a $10 million a year situation. But this still is not true scale. Recall that we had mentioned the importance of policy to reach true scale. And this is what's happened. So we started this in 2014. So, by 2016, 17, we were getting a lot of interest. We were learning as well. We were conducting outreach. And we had government teams visit our sites, learn about how we are implementing at these kind of levels, and audit the programs. Various ministries got involved, as is always the case. We got involved with them. And all this input, back and forth conversation sort of created the willpower and the desire to sort of take this to larger scales. So what we have today, going through the ringer of various ministries, talking to various government agencies, is that just, I think, 3 months ago, NDDB, the National Dairy Development Board, which is sort of working with the world's largest cooperatives, announced a clean cooking program across 100 clusters around the country as a test. And this is what I hope is a pathway to true scale. So I hope that's something. Thank you again for the opportunity. I hope what I shared is compelling. The story is much more colorful, with a lot of amazing friends and colleagues who make this network thrive. All I can say is, let's harness this incredible power of partnerships. I hear it in the previous conversations as well. It's all around us to drive this transformation that we want to see. So on that note, and on behalf of FCN, I would also welcome you all to join the network. Thank you.
Thank you, Richie. Thank you very much for a very, very interesting insight on this. Now we have finished all the presentations of the speakers. Now we start with the question and answer session, and we have roughly about 15 minutes, say till about 6:15 to 6:20 max. And I just posed a few questions. A lot of participants have already noted their questions here. And there are some questions to Dhwani and Murray later. So I'll start with Dhwani. Dhwani, you guys have done some wonderful work with the removal of lantana. So we just want to know what all the methods, what were the methods used to eradicate lantana, and what other plant species were planted after lantana removal? Because I understand after lantana is removed, we need to keep on removing every time, and a lot of other species do grow in its place. So your insight would be helpful in this.
Yeah. So to answer the first question, the method of removal is basically by uprooting. Because the roots are deep in the soil, so it needs to be uprooted completely. The entire root needs to really be uprooted, and the plant, once it's uprooted, needs to be kept upside down, so as to prevent the roots from catching the soil again. It's done manually, of course, by the people. To answer the second question is, it is not necessary that we've undertaken plantation in each site where lantana was removed. It depends on the site. For example, if it is a completely barren land with no other rootstock present or no other trees present, then we undertake a plantation of native species, which are native or local to that particular locality. In several cases, it happens, this is for the common, so in several cases it happens that on forest land there is invasion of lantana, but there are some mature trees as well as some rootstock of tendu, of palash present already on the land. So in those cases, we don't really do any active plantation. We just allow those rootstock to auto regenerate, and they do, like they regenerate on their own once lantana is removed. We may again, this is it depends. It's decided upon the way, the site. So if needed, the communities may choose to undertake grass seed sowing. So they make these grass seed balls. You may have seen a photo in my presentation, and then they throw it on the land for grass species, basically.
Okay, great. So when you said that you decide the species to be planted later, how do you decide which species you have to plant in that particular land? Do you create a mosaic of a forest in having different trees and shrubs and herbs like this, or it is generally the large trees that are encouraged?
It is decided purely in consultation with the community how they want to manage that site. But mostly it is a mix of all different kinds of native species, like there's harra, there's baheda, there's bamboo, and yeah, so all there's awla. All these native species, saplings of these native species are planted in consultation with the community. And of course, looking at the ecology and what kind of species will be supported on that land.
And from my little understanding of the Central Indian landscape, there is free grazing everywhere. So how do you address this issue? When you say we involve the villagers in managing this, plantation and everything, but what happens? How does their livestock go for grazing? Where do their livestock graze, and what kind of solutions you provide them?
So again, like I said, I mean, because it is done in a purely consultative process with the community. They are the ones who decide, first of all, whether they want to do the plantation or not, depending on whether they have alternative grazing lands. Because of the shortage of time, I couldn't really go into the detail of the case study that I mentioned in my presentation, but there are a few villages that on their own decide to, so a particular patch of land, if they're conserving it and if there's plantation that has been done, they have chosen to change their practice from open grazing to cut and carry system of practice. So their livestock still get the grass, but people actually go there and cut the grass and then feed it to their livestock rather than having the open grazing. And also, just to mention, in these villages also, as I said, like it is not just the community. We need an active partnership with different stakeholders. The forest department has also played a very major role in these particular sites, where through the eco development committees, they've a guard has been appointed there, who is being paid a monthly honorarium through the EDC fund for the protection of that particular patch of land.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Mani. Now I have a question for Mani here. You mentioned about bond challenge in your presentation. If you can just elaborate on this aspect, because a lot of our participants probably would want to know, because India has committed about 26 million hectares of forest land restoration by 2030. So how does this all the restoration efforts that collectively all these agencies are doing, and probably also by the forest department, and how does it fit into the bond challenge?
So the bond challenge commitment is initially it was 21 million hectares of degraded as well as deforested land, and 5 million hectares was added under the land degradation neutrality challenge. And a recent report from IUCN, which looked at progress, I think tracks about nearly 10 million hectares which have been restored so far in India, up to I think 2020. So the bond challenge itself looks at restoration in not only in forest areas but also in outside forest areas. And in India, the opportunity for restoration in forest areas is quite less. It's through agroforestry and trees outside of forest that increase in tree cover is being seen, which is why efforts like mosaic restoration and the agroforestry interventions that are happening in many areas become important. And even if you see the recent ISFRs, the trees outside of forest have been increasing. And this is where the improvement to achieve these challenges is seen.
Okay, great, thank you. I think now there is a question for Shekhar, if I'm not wrong. How much area or number of villages approximately has been brought under CFR in the project area in Chhattisgarh? So if you can just elaborate on this, please.
These 10 villages, roughly we're talking about 2,000 hectares of land.
Okay.
As a starting.
Okay.
And some of them have.
Yeah.
Do you have different figures?
Yeah, so the CFR, you rightly said, around 2,000 hectares. Some of it has been recognized, the CFR rights, and in one panchayat, it's under process. So we're talking roughly around 2,000 hectares of CFR in 10 villages.
And what species of plants have we decided to plant here, or have we already?
So we've undertaken sort of a taxonomic survey and identify a list of over 40 species that are to be, these are all native species. For CFR, we are focusing on primarily NTFP species. The challenge is, however, the availability. So we are also trying to develop a community nursery in the block, so as to sort of supply these species there. Dhwani is also involved in one of the sort of assignments that we've initiated in partnership with FES. Yeah, just because COVID has restricted sort of travel, so Dhwani is located closely to the project site. So yeah, she's contributing to that as well.
So would you like to add something to this, Dhwani?
It's just initiated, Kedar. So the list of 40 species that we've identified is through our work in Hoshangabad as well. We've undertaken literature review as well. We've studied the working plan of Kabarda Forest Circle. So this is a result because the project actually started in 2019 when we had the COVID restrictions. So the team has had challenges to visit the location. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question for Richie here. Richie, you mentioned about biogas units, and you rightly mentioned that it costs somewhere around 20,000 rupees, probably even more, sometimes even up to 30,000. So what practical difficulties we face when we install any biogas plant is firstly to get regular feed. Unless we have stall-fed cattle, we really cannot really go on a large scale to have biogas units. So how do we deal with this situation? Because in central India, there's a free grazing culture, and stall feeding is practically absent. So your views on this, please.
So 2 perfect points. And all I can say is yes and yes. It does cost a lot. And what we have done so far in terms of covering those costs is to demonstrate scale. We had set up these carbon transactions. So people are offsetting their pollution and it generated the money. And it's done under this standard. So it's very, third-party verification under the gold standard, and the emissions are then returned to the party providing the funds to build the units, the CapEx. The arrangement with the government right now and what we've posited to the government is the government right now subsidizes LPG. We buy the LPG from overseas.
Okay.
And so that costs foreign exchange. And on top of that, we subsidize it. So we submit that, why don't you do a generation-based incentive? So you might as well generate the LPG at home in country and pay the people that subsidy for generating that LPG. And if you do the math on it, then the payback period on it is just under 3 years, 2.5 years. And the rest is all benefits. And these are long-term durable capital expenditures. So that's what got traction. And I think that's a design. And we can also do some interesting things about fortifying the slurry, et cetera. So it generates income for the household on a monthly basis. So that's a pretty strong incentive. You're right about the fact that cattle should be, for this to function, it should be stall cattle. So that's why we do major surveys. We work with the communities to figure out who wants and can get these units. So it's not the one single, airdropping a solution for everybody. It's a customized solution to fit the needs, and it has to meet certain criteria to be successful. But on the flip side, the country is one of the largest holders of cattle in the world, decentralized. So yes, there's lots of cattle that are not stall fed, but then there's lots of cattle that are. So even if you think of like 5, 8, 10 million households, you're really hitting big numbers. You're saving about $1 billion a year for the country in Forex. And if you were to sell those tons in the markets, you can generate $400 million a year or more for the country in Forex. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. I think now we will have to move to the panel discussion. This discussion is quite interesting, and I would request some of you to be also present for the panel discussion and give your inputs if you feel like at any point during the discussion. So thank you once again for very interesting presentations, and thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us today. And now may I request the organizers to maybe initiate the panel discussion here. Thank you very much. Let me just check with Amrita if all the panelists are here. What about Sunil? Has he joined?
I don't think Sunil has joined, but I think the rest of the panelists, you can come on video now, and speakers, you can be on video or off video depending, or you can join us if you've got an input, as Kedar said. I see Sudarshan.
Hi, Sudarshan.
Hi, Kedar.
How are
Amrita.
you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm all right. Good to see you and that background, Kedar, the screen.
Now with virtual things, we can only have a background. Unfortunately, can't be in the forest.
Yes,
We should have-
true.
So, all right. So, out of the four panelists that we had today, unfortunately, Sunil Kumar, who is CEO of RBS Foundation India, could not join us due to some pressing commitments that he had. So he has sent his apologies to us. The other panelist, we have Geetika Goswami, who is Senior Program Director at Development Alternatives. Welcome, Deepika. We have Dr. Ruchika Singh, who is Director of Sustainable Landscapes and Restoration, WRI India. Welcome. And of course, Sudarshan Suchi, who is CEO at the Save the Children. Welcome all the panelists. And now I would just like to open this floor for discussion, and I would like to start with Geetika. Actually, the theme for today. What is your broad view about why we have taken this theme, and what exactly Development Alternatives is doing in this regard? Over to you.
Hi, thank you, Kedar, and hi everyone. Good evening, and thank you, organizer, for this great opportunity to speak here. So I work in Development Alternatives. Many of you may know Development Alternatives is a civil society organization working in India for more than 3 decades. Also, we are working in Africa and Southeast Asian countries. Development Alternatives, just to give a very brief about what we do, we are working both at the ground level as well as a policy level. Our main thematic areas where we work is the natural resource management, clean technology, entrepreneurship development, climate change, and as a strengthening institution. And our approach is from practice to policy. And many of you may know Bundelkhand is the area which we call our Karma Bhumi. Bundelkhand. So today what I'll speak about are my experience in the land restorations in Bundelkhand area. Just to give a very brief about Bundelkhand. Bundelkhand is a semi-arid region. It is located at in the central part, central India. It is covering 13 districts of Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh, and 6 districts in Madhya Pradesh and 7 districts in Uttar Pradesh, and it is semi-arid region with an undulating topography, with shallow soil, and it is actually having a lot of it's a the area every year almost affected by recurrent drought, and there is also the soil depth is very low. There's a population, 70% of the population in the region is a rural, and a primary occupation is agriculture, and then seasonal migration is the the normal behavior there because of the livelihood. You know, people goes out to the nearby towns and cities for the livelihood. With this background, and there is you know, in the also this area is also affected by floods because of this you know, very high rainfall in a very short period of time, and that's how the soil erosion is very high. With this you know, background, I would like to say that what Development Alternatives has done there. So with this you know, we have done we worked in extensively in four district in Bundel in Madhya Pradesh, which is also the central Indian landscape, part of central Indian landscape, and where we have done a number of you know, interventions uh, uh, you know, all watershed management approaches, check dams and soil moisture conservation, soil erosion conservation, restriction of the soil erosion, and so on. And also at the same time, we have done sustainable agriculture practices with the communities, and everything you know, we have done through our partnership with the communities. So as you know, strengthening institution is one of our you know, core area of work. With this you know, last 3 decades, we have restored quite a bit of area of these 4 districts. And as well as with the restoration, there's a livelihoods of these communities has actually improved a lot. After this working as the last 3 decades, we have identified some of the areas to do a you know, natural capital accounting assessment. But we actually saw with this you know, accounting, through this natural capital accounting survey, that we have taken, you know, this is a purely a scientific study that we did. We have taken 30 villages of these 4 districts, and out of the 30 villages, 18 villages were we taken from the intervention villages and 12 from control villages. And this survey actually the results are the results shows that there is a huge you know, improvement of the capital, the natural capital, social capital, human capital, and cultural capital. And it has been seen that due to this restoration, you know, as all the speakers have said, it's not only the improvement of the biodiversity, improvement of this land, improvements of the of their livelihood activities. There's also and the water availability increased. People started getting from single crop to double crop. There is livestock's you know, better the fodder improvement, fodder availability also increased. So all those actually shows that upon investment of $500,000 US in those areas, the return was actually almost 70 million US, which is a huge 132% of you know, improvement or increased of the natural capital, as well as there is an improvement of the social capital, human capital, and the cultural capital of those areas. I mean, I think one of the speakers has already talked about this. You know, the improvement of this capital. So I just want to end here to say that the restoration is not you know, has a multifaceted benefits. It's improvement on not only for the livelihoods, the earnings. It improves the entire community. The social cohesion improved. The you know, we can see that girls' childs who were actually left their school due to the problem in the water, and they used to go distance to fetch water for drinking purposes. And this is the fate of the girls in in India, and where we have seen that due to this you know, restoration activities, those girl students, the girls have then gone back to school. So the social you know, the education, the entire education level improved. the health has improved with the nutrition. They started getting a better nutrition. So the entire health of the community is improved. So it's a multifaceted sort of improvement if we say from the restoration. So it's just an example, and I will say when I'll come back
Sure,
for
sure,
another
sure.
question.
Thank you, thank you very much for a very detailed introduction of the work that Development Alternatives is doing. Now I come to Ruchika. Ruchika, WRI has already presented its wonderful work and plan in Sindhi district, and I'm particularly interested because Sindhi district also becomes a part of Bandhavgarh and Sanjay Dogri corridor. Uh, Having worked there for few years now, uh, how do you see when we look at the restoration plans that we make and vis-a-vis tiger conservation that we are looking at? So a lot of times, I mean, when we look at restoration, there is a lot of involvement of human beings, and of course that is important. But then, how does the interest of tiger conservation, how does the interest of wildlife come into play here?
Thanks, Kedar, for for the introduction, as well as hello, everyone. We heard very insightful presentations this evening from the speakers, and very excited about being part of this panel. Just to kind of, before responding to what Kedar asked, I just want to very briefly sort of introduce WRI India. We are an Indian environmental organization, and working on how do we convert big ideas into action at the nexus of economic opportunity and human well-being. And a larger sort of focus has been on talking in terms of restoration and livelihood. What we also heard from the presenters in the earlier, we know that there are a lot of people who are dependent on forests and agriculture for sustenance. In India, it's 700 million people, and 85% of which are small and marginal landholding farmers. And how does restoration and nature-based solutions as a low cost effective strategy support it in a win-win solution both for climate and development sort of becomes important, more so with the COVID crisis. How we've been looking at restoration within sort of our own work has been thinking through in terms of how do we support or inform pathways that can mobilize different interventions for landscape restoration, for instance agroforestry. What Marie sort of mentioned earlier in terms of this immense potential for mosaic restoration in India. There is also potential for wide scale restoration to kind of reduce fragmentation in forest areas. So what sort of pathways in terms of policy analysis become important? How do you do that collaborative planning, etc.? Monitoring, of course, also is very important. And the third sort of important key element would be in terms of how do we unlock finance through working through accelerating some of the barriers to implementation, whether it's in terms of capacities, resources, etc. That would be key. And coming from there, I'm thinking through a bit more in terms of, how does for Central Indian landscapes and in general, how do people and some of the conservation goals come together? So one of our learning from CD was when we were sort of doing a lot of these planning around, restoration opportunity assessments and developing these, so one thing that came key was local priorities are key when we think about restoration planning. And from that context, a lot of priorities that emerged was, for instance, demand for fuel wood fodder, which people are looking from the landscape, but also different ecological services, whether it's around water, biodiversity, that become key as well. When we are planning for these landscapes, thinking through in terms of tenure and resource rights, of course, becomes important, because eventually it's, once the tenure and resource rights are clear, it would be easier to kind of conserve and protect landscapes as well. So if we are talking about, there is huge potential for Forest Rights Act, for instance, in India. So, if areas are protected, then, we've also seen examples of where in regions where communities where rights have been recognized are, benefiting both in terms of, the Gram Sabhas are managing these lands themselves and, for instance, in Narmada district, and, a lot of economic benefits that emerge key. So yeah, how I would answer the question on, the tiger conservation and people would be is, if we can plan it collaboratively and not keep people out of the landscapes, that's, a more nuanced way of sort of looking at it is one way to put it. And thinking through in terms of the the livelihood opportunities that could come for people also becomes important. And just to give you an example, one of the things that we launched what is called the Land Accelerator South Asia, last year. Basically, it's a curated, program which fosters entrepreneurship through a 4 months, intensive training around and dedicated mentorship, technical expertise, marketing, etc., and brings entrepreneurs together. And in the first cohort, we had, very innovative entrepreneurs. For instance, Adimalai from Nilgiris, we had Basta Se Bazar Tak from Chhattisgarh, B Basket, etc. So very, interesting sort of different business models that people are taking forward. So that is how we could kind of think through in terms of restoration, linking restoration and livelihoods together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ruchika. Uh, uh, I was just seeing Sudarshan here now. He has
Yeah,
vanished.
I think he's just dropped off.
Okay, okay. All right.
We can
So
read back to him perhaps.
yes. So all right. So if we look at okay, we can continue with Ruchika then, because I have a question for Ruchika here. Yes, I fully agree with you that when we look at tiger conservation, local communities must be involved, and I fully endorse this view. And we have been, as Corbett Foundation, also we have been working on this. Uh, Probably, if we can just discuss a bit more on this, how what is the what are the maybe 3 or 4 ways that the local communities can be involved in a way that it directly indirectly supports in conservation, because all that we are talking about in when we look at restoration or involving of communities so that their livelihoods are enhanced. I think somewhere nature conservation is the umbrella theme that we all are looking at. So if we can probably share a few pointers as to how local communities can be best involved in conservation of all this.
Sure. So, I mean, one example, again, I'll go back to, planning, how communities could be also better involved is if, one makes collaborative landscape plans, for instance. I mean, that's just not trying to be prescriptive here, but, while we plan for a landscape thing in terms of whichever may be the priority areas in terms of forest protection, but also, the areas, if there are private lands within, private lands, what sort of interventions may be crucial so that people's demand are also met, whether it's around fuel wood, fodder, etc. Those become important to consider. Also, how do we develop strong institutions? Who are the key stakeholders that we need to kind of bring together is an important consideration. For instance, our learning from Siddhi was that while we talk about, developing we were doing the restoration opportunity assessment, how do we create a multi-stakeholder platform and, that shared understanding on what conservation or restoration, whatever the objectives might be in a particular landscape, that becomes very crucial. And the third point would be also thinking through in terms of, I think Marie kind of alluded to this in terms of when she was showing the stakeholder actor network map. So in a landscape, when we are, even planning for the landscape, who are the key actors or networks who are there? And our learning from CD, for instance, says that, it's always about, there may be everyone may not be connected or maybe available in the room when we are doing these sort of different exercises, but if while developing these plans we are also conscious of who's left out, or if they're whether it's women, whether it's some of the marginalized communities from different castes, for instance, then how do we bring them also in the room becomes important. And why I say that in context of conservation and livelihood would be that accordingly then we could also think about how whose sustenance are we really thinking about if we are planning ecotourism, or if we are thinking about some value chains that may need to be created. So can we sort of plan for the entire sort of different set of actors together, and if there are some missing, then how do we sort of bring them together through by working on some of the barriers that might be there. I'll pause here. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Uh, Geetika, let me ask you a question. Since you said that a lot of work development alternatives has done in Bundelkhand area, and I have also been to that area a couple of times, uh, and seen some water conservation work being done. So if you can elaborate more on this aspect, how what kind of measures you have taken to enhance the water availability, harvesting the rainwater, uh, providing this water for agriculture, many different forms of agriculture that you have probably introduced there, and which has ultimately led to soil conservation and overall landscape restoration. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So as I already said, in the beginning that since we are there for last almost more than 3 decades, and the first and foremost important problem was there, Bundelkhand, though it's a semi-arid region, but the rainfall is not very low. Here rainfall is, but the problem of Bundelkhand is that the rainfall, the period is very short with a very high rainfall. So the problem arises when there's a huge rainfall, very short period of time, a lot of soil gets eroded, and that's the topsoil gets eroded, and it's just deposited in the river. And the river, that the Betwa river is the river which flows through Bundelkhand, through this area. So the work that we have done mostly is building a lot of check dams, and up till now we have almost more than 400 check dams that we have built. There are different sizes, some are bigger, some are smaller check dams, but that check dams is actually helps you to harvest the rainwater when it is a sort of heavy rain. At the same time, what we also have done, not only just putting the check dams, the small check dams in those, to restrict the water flowing out, we also have done, plantation activities. There is also different sort of plantation. It is fodder plantation, medicinal plantation around the check dams, so that the soil, it can actually restrict the soil erosion as well. At the same time, we also have done gully plugging, contour banding, and so on and so forth. That is all are part of the watershed management approaches. At the same time, we also have quite a number of activity. We have strengthened the local institution, the community level institution, so that communities can come together and protect the land. Though development alternative is there for more than 3 decades, but we all our work is done through community partnership, and we have a platform called Bundelkhand Communities Platform, where we have around 300 small community organization. They are that's one platform. We meet every 2 weeks there, just to discuss how things are going, what sort of activities we should do. Currently we have started working on millet cultivation. Millet was also one of the earlier, maybe like 40 years back, it was only millet that was there, and people have used to have habituated with the millet as their food habit. But as everywhere it is happening, because of this water availability increases, and also there's high MSPs on the paddy, people converted to from millet to wheat and paddy cultivation, and most of these farmers, at least some of their lands, they are cultivating paddy for getting better return through MSPs. But at the same time, now because of our Bundelkhand platform and all other capacity development work, we, quite a number of farmers have started, again, millet cultivation, the Kodo Kutke that was there earlier, right now they also have started, along with other vegetable cultivation, which is also sort of in the homestead garden. So water harvesting, as you are asking me, is not a single one sort of activity. So all these activities are putting together collectively raise the water level. It is also help in recharging the water, the groundwater. So communities can get it even when there is no rain, even in the summer season. And that's why they have now started from single crop to come up to the double crop, and the vegetables they are collecting almost entire year. A lot of the migration has been reduced. The women got literate. We also at the same time having, it is also part of the, you can say the restoration activity is that now we have women, a huge women literacy program, which also help the women to come up to speak their voices. So one of the very important, in fact, the question that you asked to Ruchika, I would say that that strengthening institution is the key, and the partnership with the community is the key for any success or any sort of intervention. And when women should come up and speak their languages, I think that is when we will get the maximum success out of this restoration activities. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. So thank you very much for all this. I see Sudarshan back. Sudarshan, are you there?
Yeah.
Can we
I
have
can
your
hear
video
you.
on?
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, it says the host has disabled it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I request the organizers to please look into this. But meanwhile, I'll just start with the question. I mean, we seek your opening remarks, Sudarshan, with your very rich experience in the Central Indian landscape with Reliance Foundation earlier and now with the Save the Children. How does your past and present marry together? And we would like to hear something from you on this.
Yeah. So I think. First of all, so 2017, I think when we all came together, the last I was, physically together with the whole approach. And today, so when I heard the four presenters, particularly, I would say the directional thoughts of Shekhar and team, I mean, fascinated me. There's a lot of distance traveled from a time of absolute skepticism or a non-starting context. Landscape as an idea and inclusion has come true. I primarily came into this because almost entire development sector approach is all about collectivizing, but it was always good for somebody else and not for ourselves. I mean, collectivizing of the marginal communities for themselves. I think landscape as an idea is for the first time bringing collective approach of all the stakeholders from across board, and I think it therefore brings in a different mindset. Few concerns. I think from again, like I said, from my reflection, I think the ease of traveling between a macro perspective and a micro operational context, because some of the stakeholders operate on a very basic survival mode, and some of the stakeholders are the big thinking, big number, big scale. Almost it can be scary for some of the stakeholders. So the entire approach will work only as strong as the weakest link is, and only at the speed of the capacity of the weakest link. And that by and large is a learning of all collectives. wherever there's an external booster to pace up, scale up, intensify, it has fallen hard. So that's one thing I would certainly flag, that it's good to appreciate right in the beginning and set the pace based on the, whoever's pace is the minimalist or the slow, not minimalist, minimum or slowest or the weakest content. The second thing is, how much is each stakeholder willing to give up eventually counts far more than what they can get out from it. And that is something which is one of the biggest challenges in most transformational journeys. Last but not the least, by and large, the narrative prevailing in people controlling financial resources is, it has the buzzwords of reached, touched, scale up, technology, outcome, output, impact, all this within a few months and days. And landscape approach is bringing in a long haul of 5, 7 years and perhaps even 20 years. How are we going to blend and balance between these two is a challenge. I'm bringing these in because all the good side of things has been flagged by others already. So I thought, let me bring this dimension as to what kind of things, the other side, the constraints part, Kedar.
If I may bring in a perspective.
Kedar, you're muted.
Yes, sorry. Shekhar, please carry on. Yes.
If I may bring in a perspective, Sudarshanji, I mean, I just loved your remarks. We gave this a very good thought at the very start. We have a realistic time frame of about 20 years or a generation for this transformational change. Like you said, the weakest link, when they start having the power to actually make to have their words out and to be able to control conversations, that is when we'll start seeing these big changes. And that's a time-consuming process. Right now, for example, some of the tribes we're working with, they just don't know even how to voice their opinions. So it's a habitual change. It takes a lot of time for them to get the courage, even to think. For example, small conversations. How do you see your life in the next 5 years? I mean, they live a very day-to-day life. I mean, they just live for the next monsoon to come. I mean, they just cannot even conceive the concept of looking at 5 years down the lane. So, I mean, these are the realities of the ground. So we are taking it step by step. So we're very realistic about these things. I mean, all the things you said, I mean, we've given them deep thought and are part of our, design. These are slow processes which will kick in. It's also for our entire core team itself is a very new beginning, and then we're slowly becoming used to this, inclusion, putting all these values together. I'm sure you'll see some difference in the next couple of years. I'll be happy to give you an update soon. Thank you.
And and while I might take Kedar, if I can come in again for
please. Of course.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say is, looking back at last few decades, the approach of external stakeholders, physically newer, external, bigger, stronger stakeholders, wherever they have come previously for partnerships, and this unfortunately includes NGOs also. There are many more experiences of communities being let down than experiences of continuity to the commitments made for various reasons. So when we are bringing in everybody, it is starting from a space of suspicion and starting from a space of doubt that if not about the intent, about the continuity, because I think everything holds together as good as how we behave when things go wrong. Some of the things will go wrong, somewhere, whether the design, whether the structure, whether the resources or thing. And how do the stronger stakeholders behave when things go wrong also to a great extent determines, how conceptually we evolve and sustain.
You made a very important point, Sudarshan. When we work with the communities, I mean, gaining the trust of the communities is primary aim. And if we can't deliver, we stand to lose out on this. However, it, as you rightly said, that what steps we take is very important. So on this point, may I request Richie if he can come here and share his views on this. Richie. Richie, can we have you have your views on this? Or probably, oh, okay, he's there.
Sorry, can you all hear me? My video is going very shaky.
Yes, we can hear you. Go on, please.
I was barely hearing folks when they were talking. So
okay.
I think we were talking about how communities can sort of hold together through thick and thin to provide durable change, right?
Yes, more or less. And then
Sudarshan. Yeah.
Go on.
So I think I couldn't agree more. One, I think the process has to be very much a bottom up. It has to be a very broad set of buy-in. So the way we work, for example, the lessons that I draw from this is there are different types of partners in this network, large NGOs like an EDF, and then really small ones which have a budget of hardly anything. And how do you sort of capitalize and work with each other to get to the outcomes you want? So, the way we build is the thinking internally has been within the group that let's build sandboxes. So let's find an area, find 5,000 households where we'll implement with a good CBO, NGO, other partners, but have everybody else come in and look into that arena and help us improve ourselves. They build ambition, they build their own trust in themselves that, look, I really want to do this now. Otherwise you go to a small NGO and say, here's 14 crores and implement something is very hard. They're even nervous about touching larger amounts of money. So figuring out how, how to drive this ambition, getting people to lean in, the CBOs, the NGOs, the local panchayats, means that having a very transparent approach, letting people look into your own failures, looking into the sandbox and see, what works, what doesn't, how much of it translates, be willing to open their books. So all that has really helped us. So I think listening to Sudarshan talk about, these are durable and long-term issues. Our programs also took 10 plus years to get to the scales that we did. Now we can see it's always like people see the success and they think, oh, the tipping point was hit and here we are. It was so quick, but it's really 10, 12, 14 years of really hard work of laying the groundwork to get to that kind of scale. So that's what really makes it durable. So I think keeping that glue together, keeping that cohesion as the weakest link is the most important one here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Richie. The only thing is,
may I come in here?
Yes, Geetika, please carry on.
In continuation, what Sudarshan and Richie and Shekhar was telling, I think this is absolutely, true that first thing to get that, to win the trust of the communities is the consistency of us. If we are doing a project for 2 years or 3 years or 1 year, and then we go from there because whatever the reason we don't get any more funding and so on. So then we lose the trust, so you have to be there, at a continuous length of time and be engaged with them, continue with the conversation with them so that, you will be able to gain the confidence. Otherwise, if you just be there for some times and then come back, you will lose that, trust, and then that would be very difficult for communities to again, go back to them. So it is not a sort of a quick thing. It requires time, and it's like a decade minimum to gain that kind of confidence where the communities come together and, really help you with doing your work.
So Kedar, just one last line and then I'm out, so I won't bother you. But
No.
the converse also holds true, correct? Having this discussion that you also should have an exit strategy. You have to transfer power. If you're the one there all the time, to me at least, that's not viable. What you have to create is the institutional structures and the capacity to transfer power. You draw on their power to learn, to create an intervention, but in the end, whatever you've brought to the table, you got to leave behind and create durable institutions that will drive that change. Sorry, let me pause there.
No, Richie, carry on.
Keep going.
Yes, carry on.
The converse also holds true, correct? Having this discussion that you also should have an exit strategy. You have to transfer power. If you're the one there all the time, to me at least, that's not viable. What you have to create is the institutional structures and the capacity to transfer power. You draw on their power to learn, to create an intervention, but in the end, whatever you've brought to the table, you got to leave behind and create durable institutions that will drive that change. Sorry, let me pause there.
Absolutely, absolutely right. All the projects that we implement anywhere must have a sustainability aspect to it, and we have to have an exit strategy, because funding at the most can be for 3 years, at the most for 5 years. I mean, 5 years is a very ambitious time period, I would say, saying. But for 3 years, after 3 years, there has to be transfer of power. We have to see how the local communities can carry on with the work that we have trained them into or given them skills or whatever. Uh, the problem here is, we are all running out of time. The sense when we are looking at, I'm not talking of the time of the session today, but the time where the forest loss is at a very large pace. So how does I mean we understand that there has to be a bottoms up approach. It's very very important. However, the kind of time that is required, to introduce a project of this scale and get the community trust, and then get them involved in the kind of activities that we want them into, and then start doing the restoration or start doing providing them with livelihood skills, uh, and look at the result. I mean, that's a long run process. Sometimes it takes 5 years, sometimes it takes 10 years, sometimes we will fail. And at the same time, there is several things happening at the back, where forest losses are really happening, and those are activities which are probably beyond our control. So how do we look at this? I mean, how do we address these challenges? Uh, 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 I don't know if at a policy level one has to really talk to the government, and but at the same time that information has to percolate down to the grassroots level. uh, this is a very peculiar challenge that this landscape faces, and many other conservation landscapes in India, but particularly in Central India. The kind of linear development projects. Yesterday, there was a very very engaging discussion on linear development that are taking place in this area. So we have to look at a larger picture when we look at restoration. I would just like to hear views of the panel and today's speakers. If anybody has any thoughts on this, please, you can just start talking about it. I see Shekhar unmuting himself. Yeah, please, Shekhar.
Well, I mean, based on my experience, may I just share my screen? Is that possible?
Yes, you can, of course.
Okay, I see the restoration as a very, very complex conditions of knots. I mean, it's just life. I mean, the thing is, these complications will always stay and play a big role. There will never be a situation where we will not have trouble. There will always be trouble. But the point is, the minute you start, for example, linear infrastructure is trouble, climate change is a trouble, government policies are trouble, politics is a trouble. I mean, there's always trouble all the time. I mean, if these troubles go, some other trouble will come. But the point is, every time you unleash or attempt to unleash one issue, what a whole well-being unleashes, a whole opportunity for tigers to survive will unleash. Things good will happen with every attempt. So the idea is you will never have a situation where everything is taken care of, where all the problems are gone. It's a never-ending process. But the process is the minute you start even starting to attempt it, facets of goodness will release, and it's a process. More and more people become involved and start looking at this larger puzzle and try to unlock it. The faster the process becomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Shekhar. Any other panelist would like to share his or views?
Kedar, Kedar, if I can come in.
Sudarshan, yes, please.
Yeah,
and then Richi after that.
Yeah. So, Kedar, I feel that basically restoration, if it's a, who are the people on the spot, how much they own to the issue, and how is their reality factored into it. I think all those things determine the staging, facing, and pacing of it. If again, I mean, I look at it as a part of a consistent part of a larger entire development process. And sadly, like one of the things I've seen over the years, in terms of again between those who have resources and those who are supposed to be the primary actors on ground. Quite often, building the perspectives and building the capacities and building the understanding of on-the-spot people finds least amount of resources and time, whereas bulk of the actually change is driven by them or is sustained by them. So I think that is where we actually need to address when the design and the planning is being done and it's evolving.
Thank you, Sudarshan. Richie, your point, please, on this.
Well, that's a great question. This is like a whole debate, a day-long debate on this question. So look, I think one is the activity of restoration from my lens. I mean, so there's some of it is well understood, some of it isn't. So let's just, on the hypothetical that a lot of it is understood, then the question to me becomes not one of what do we need to do for restoration at the activity level, but at the what kind of incentives do we need to unleash to corral greater activity in that space? So question becomes one of like, can we get this Indian government or the Madhya Pradesh government to incentivize a higher biodiversity index, create some sort of a race to the top in a block or district level that generates some sort of an inflow of funds into that area, into those households? What kind of policies can unlock sort of unlock demand or change bring markets more to the table to get wider participation from the constituents. So that's kind of what I think of at times, because that's what will drive that change, that bottom-up demand that, yes, we want to restore, we understand this, the structural reform that needs to take place. So often my leanings are towards what else needs to be true to get wider participation, because all of us are talking about building trust, creating wider participation, but it's very, very incremental. So that's to learn. But after you've learned, what do you do? And I think that's where sort of collective thinking on this would be a very interesting conversation.
Yes, thank you, Richie. And I couldn't agree more. This topic, it can be discussed for hours and hours and days together, and probably still be unanswered. May I come back to Ruchika for her closing remarks on this particular question? Ruchika, over to you.
Thanks, Kedar. Really fascinating discussion, and will not emphasize what I think others have also said. Restoration, of course, is going to be difficult. It's not easy to do. I mean, we have a lot of challenges that we need to kind of work through. But if it has to be sort of self-sustaining, what can we do differently? I mean, I'll go back to the livelihoods point, and it's. Organizations, NGOs, CBOs, etc., they would be in a landscape for a certain amount of time, but eventually it has to be, something with restoration has to be people driven. So, they need to be driving, and livelihoods becomes important in that context. If the right incentives, economic incentives and livelihood incentives are there, that could be a good driver. I mean, I was just thinking of the example of Araku. I mean, which you see that's happened with in case of Araku, where people now are invested in it, and it's also bringing tremendous economic opportunities and benefits to local communities as well, and a lot of them tribal communities as well. So that's something to kind of consider. The other is at the state level, we also need to, one is the livelihood incentives, etc., but organizations like us, how do we also think about some of the incentive, the shifting incentives piece? I mean, there are, how do we work or leverage some of the policy incentives which are there? But if there are things that are not working, can we come collaboratively think about how do we work around shifting some of these incentives with, the state, working collaboratively in a more cohesive way is, for long-term change that we are trying to see. That sort of becomes another sort of important, crucial issue to look at, because eventually if we want people to be driving it, I mean, sustainability, it will only be sustainable when, people see the benefits from, and most of the times when we talk to local communities, they themselves, it's always not just about economic benefits. They do identify, biodiversity and other, conservation benefits themselves. So it's best that if we sort of plan in different ways, and also see which are the strengths at what levels all of us could also leverage to come together on some of these pieces. Thanks.
Thanks, Ruchika. And I saw Geetika raising her hand, so I would definitely want to give her the last voice for today's session. Geetika, over to you, and then we close this session for today.
Thank you, Kedar. And I think, yeah, I agree with all my co-speakers and panelists that it is the restoration is people's driven, and also as some of you has talked about the exist strategy. I would also agree and say that exist strategy should be to link this with the government schemes, or it should converge with any of the government scheme, or at the with the policies that is already there in place in India. If we look at the policies on the land, there are number of the policies, I would say. And the problem, all we know that there is a gap in the implementation in that case. So right now that the government of India is having this LDN target, where all restoration activities will come under that target. And if all the bits and pieces of all the work that all the NGOs and CSOs are doing, I think then one partner is the community, the people, the local stakeholders. But obviously, we have to bring the national government and the state government on the same platform. Otherwise, when there will be no funding, we will not be there. But if that activities is connect or linked to the existing schemes of government of India, I think then it can continue under that. And if the local government is aware of the kind of activities and the momentum that has got created through any of these restoration activities or project, I think then we need to bring the policymakers both at a state and the national level, to start, as we all are saying that the community should be involved from the very beginning while the project is getting designed. I think at the same time the local government and the state governments as well as the national government, if possible, the relevant department should be part of this, and so that it can continue at least for a CSO things. We have a very limited sort of scope, but if it can connect to the for the schemes which is already there being implemented, I think then it would get the actual success. Mr. Afia, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Geetika. Of course, CSOs have limited strength. However, they drive the change. And we have seen through the wonderful presentations that everyone has given so far. And the main point that has struck me is the kind of great collaborations we all have. 15 years before, I mean, the collaboration was a rare thing. Very few NGOs would collaborate with each other. However, times have changed, and we have all realized the strength in working together, avoiding duplication and of efforts, and pooling in efforts and resources from various means. So with this, I would like to thank all the panelists, all the speakers for their time and wonderful presentations, insights, and discussion throughout this session. Tomorrow's day is also full of collaboration and discussion. As NCC as a knowledge platform, and we specifically focus on collaborations. All of you will know about Satpura Landscape Tiger Partnership, which is a great consortium of organizations working for tiger conservation. However, their work their work encompasses a lot of human element to it, working a lot with the communities. And I invite all of you all the participants of this session to join us tomorrow as well. So thank you very much for a great session. Thank you very much for the time. And I take your leave and I declare this session as over for today. Thank you. Good night.